hello to our wonderful reality sandwich conscious community. Kyle here, back with another unique share your experience. Here with Ryan, and Ryan's going to be, Ryan, if you wouldn't mind for me and to our audience doing a brief 1 or 2 cents intro, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am the founder of Kanna Extract Company. I've been working with Kanna now for about 12 years, but we started this company, Kanna Extract Company, a little bit more than a year ago now, where we're focused on cultivating and sourcing really high potency strains of a plant called Kanna, also known as Scaletium tortuosum. And then we produce very high potency extracts of this plant that can be taken on their own or used in different products or formulations. So, for those who don't know what Kanna is, this is a succulent or plant medicine that grows in the deserts of South Africa. It contains unique psychoactive compounds that are not found anywhere else on the planet. And while they're psychoactive, they're not psychedelic. So they're not psychedelic in the way that like mushrooms or LSD is psychoactive. They're heart openers. So when you take Kanna, what you feel is generally more connected to your heart center, more connected to like your emotional intelligence. It's also accompanied with feelings of just feeling like very grounded, centered, but also happy and more open, and just generally you feel more pleasant and delightful. So yeah, so that's Kanna, and that's what we do is grow
Ryan,
and
you
make.
took my first question from me. Those of us in the know in the plant medicine community, we're seeing Khan on a quick roller coaster rise here. But I was going to say for those not in the know who are just dipping their toe into even trying cannabis for the first time and wanting to mix up their usual supplement routine with these new herbs that they're learning about. Where does Kanna fit in, would you say? It's an herb from South Africa. It's a heart opener and pathogenic, as some people call it. Where does it fit on the spectrum of psychedelics, and how do you foresee it being implemented into people's daily rituals or routines?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Kanna, in like the full spectrum of all the different compounds and plant medicines that are out there, Kanna I would definitely consider an entry point. So it's definitely it's much lighter than some of those other compounds that you mentioned. It's very gentle. You don't see visuals when you see it. Really, like the experience is felt in the body and emotionally. And I would say it's like you're still very much in control of what you're feeling. So like I said, it's a great entry point for people that are curious about like the plant medicine space or microdosing or psychedelics, because there is definitely a felt effect, but you're it's very sweet, and like I said, you just feel very calm and happy. If I were to try to compare it to other psychoactive compounds that are out there, I would say caffeine is probably a good one. Where caffeine, like when you take it, you're definitely feeling it, but you're still very functional and in control. The difference is Kanna's not like a stimulant, but I would say it's like it can be as strong as a strong dose of caffeine.
So you see this as more of a daily morning or intake rather than a ritualistic medicinal experience.
I mean, I see people using it all of the above, and interestingly, that's kind of how it's been used for thousands of years. There's two indigenous communities that we know of that used Kanna traditionally. This is the San and the Khoi in South Africa, and Kanna was a part of many different aspects of their life. So they would use it ceremonially in high doses with intention of like entering trance states or altered states of consciousness. But they would also use it in low microdoses to help with hunting because it has this ability to stave off, like you don't feel pain and hunger as much when you take it. And they would also use it socially to just feel happier and connect with each other. And that's kind of how I see people using it today. You can use it in low doses on a daily basis and there is a lot of science out there that shows that um, it has some real potential to help with mental health issues, namely depression and anxiety. But there's also a lot of pro-cognitive benefits, so like focus, that kind of thing. And then socially, I see people using it as an alternative to alcohol or other substances that people would use. I mean, Kanna is pretty amazing as a social use compound because in a higher amount, and we can later in the conversation we can get into like what that means, higher or lower amount. Um, the initial come up can be quite strong, like for 20 to 30 minutes, so you're really feeling the Kanna, and then after that, it drops down into this really nice, like just afterglow sensation that lasts for about 2 to 3 hours, and you just feel really good and open, um, and then after 2 to 3 hours, you just go back to normal and no hangover or come down. And so for a lot of people, that's really ideal for something to help with opening up and connecting socially. Um, and then I've seen people use it in ceremony too, on its own, in like a cacao ceremony or just a high dose where they're using it with intention in a container that's designed to facilitate connection or deeper work, or if it's being combined with other compounds or plant medicines like mushrooms for a full-on journey.
Beautifully put. As this is the Share Your Experience series, I'd like for you to roll back the clock. When did you first discover Kana, and what was your first intake experience like? And, how did it awaken you to the path you're on now?
Yeah, so I mentioned I have been working with Kanna for about 12 years. So the first time I was introduced to it was in 2012, and that was in a facilitated guided experience, and it was a combination of Kanna and MDMA. And for me, I'd never I'd never been high before in my entire life. So this was my entry point into all plant medicines and psychedelics. And so not only was it my first time taking like a substance that put me into an altered state of consciousness like that, but it was the first heart opening. And uh, for those that have, I guess for those who have experimented with psychedelics and plant medicines, and those who haven't, there is a range of experiences that you can have, and heart opening experiences are very different than having like this intense visual experience with like ayahuasca or um, LSD. Like it just, I don't know. I mean, it just connects you to like an inner wisdom and knowing that is so important. Having that connection with your own intuition and wisdom, and also just this feeling of being connected to everything. That I mean, in that moment, I knew that the rest of my life would be dedicated to working with plant medicines, and that if other people could experience that the world would be a much better place.
How did you get invited to this first ceremony? Walk me through what that was like, if you don't mind sharing, and again, what spearheaded you from that to the path you're on now.
So to paint the scene, this was back in 2012, and
So there is no psychedelic plant medicine industry. Even cannabis is pretty fringe at this point.
yeah, adult use hadn't even passed in California yet. Um, so yeah, it's so crazy how different things are now. And like I said, I'd never been high. Like I grew up in the suburbs of LA. I tried smoking cannabis once and just you know, didn't get into it. And I was working at a juice bar here in LA. For those that are familiar with LA, Creation Juicery, and so I was already working with plants in a way. People were using plants to detox their body and support their health. And one of my customers just invited me to this underground thing that I didn't even really understand what I was being invited to. And I was I was very adventurous. I was 26, didn't have a lot going on, and so I don't know. I just went for it, and I'm really glad that I did.
Beautifully put. Now, you've previously mentioned, starting a business is a whole nother beast than participating in a ceremony and using these plant medicines. From that experience, where did you discover this Kanna was coming from, and what was the catalyst to want you to spread the word and create products around it?
Yeah, that's a good. So, like I said, I was first introduced to it in 2012, and really that was the only context I had for how I was working with Kana was in these kinds of experiences that were facilitated, and it wasn't definitely wasn't a business for me. It was a business for some people, but I was a happy participant, and um, I went from Kana to, I went from that ceremonial work or facilitated work to learning how to grow mushrooms. I think that was in 2014, 2015 ish, learning how to grow mushrooms and kind of doing that and some side gigs in cannabis. Nothing, I mean, I was really just like traveling a lot and exploring and figured things out. I wasn't starting a business in any way. But in 2000, I think it was 2017 or 2018, Paul Stamets went on Joe Rogan, did a podcast about microdosing, and that I think just changed things for all of us. That was really the beginning in a lot of ways of this industry, and so I had been growing. People that I was supporting with those medicines approached me to make microdosing formulas, and that was really into that was my entry point into learning how to formulate products, create products, and everything that goes into that, from packaging to how do you grow. Not even really thinking about it as a business at that point, but there's all these people that need this medicine. Like, how do you support them in a way that is efficient and you're giving them the highest quality possible? And so, yeah, it's interesting as I see other businesses in this space and like entrepreneurs. It's like they're entrepreneurs coming from some other business into this, and for me, it's like I was kind of born in the plant medicine experiences and going the opposite direction. And so, yeah, as I was learning how to do all this with mushrooms, I really wanted to do something that was legal, and could help a lot more people at scale and make my life less stressful. So that's when I started looking at Kanna more closely, because I was looking for something like, what is a sacred plant, or some kind of psychoactive compound that's legal, that is a sacred plant, and meaning like it's been used in ceremony, has that kind of legacy or lineage behind it, is psychoactive, and also has real efficacy for mental health. And Kanna just checked all of those boxes. And yeah, the more I researched it, the more I realized there's something really important here that like needs it stands on its own as something that people should know about and have as part of their plant medicine tool belt or pharmacopoeia of plant allies to look to when you're either trying to create an experience for someone, or you're just trying to help someone with a different aspect of mental health. Kanna is a powerful ally. So yeah, so I started making products with Kanna. It was like marketed as like a Kanna microdosing products. It was with a brand I had called Hearthstone Collective, and I just scoured the earth to try to find the best Kanna. And the more I really delved into this space and industry around Kanna, I realized there was a real need to do what I'm doing with Kanna Extract Company, which is get on the ground, work with actual farmers growing the plants, like really get to know the genetics of the plants, really understand like the alkaloid compositions that are possible with this plant, and get the best extracts possible and get that to people in the best products possible. And so that's what we're setting out to do with Kanna Extract Company.
You mentioned dosage earlier. What was your first dosage as part of that first ceremony, and how has your continued kind of use, differed or been the same from that experience? Are you a daily microdoser? How do you properly ingest and dose this plant?
So I've used it every single way you can imagine, almost every single way you can imagine. And uh, to answer the first part of that question, I don't actually know what I was given in that first experience. They don't really disclose what they're giving. Um, in Like I said, though, it was very likely Kanna and MDMA. I don't know if the extracts of Kanna were as good as what we're making now. Um, but what I've found is that now what I would recommend for people is like a 60-60, like 60 milligrams of each
Mhm.
is really nice combo. Um, and then uh, as far as, yeah, so the way I started using it more in like a product basis was very low doses, like really building a microdosing protocol the way you would with like a mushroom microdosing protocol, where you're not really taking it to feel something in the moment, but you're taking it daily over the course of like 4 to 6 weeks. And over that time with consistent use, you actually start to see real improvement in things like anxiety or depression. And so I've used it a lot in that capacity, in like both capsules and sublingual drops. But more recently, my focus has been in the social use space. So putting in high doses in edibles, or even just the extracts that we make. You can take intranasally, like taking a bump of something. I don't know if you've ever done that with anything. I'm, but that's really strong. Like you really feel it that way. And so if you were to like, if you bump other things so socially, I'd recommend Kanna this way because it's a lot safer. Um, you feel great at the end of 3 hours. Like there's no hangover come down. So it's pretty awesome. It's becoming super popular in like the dance rave scene in Europe, used that way. Um,
So sounds definitely like a icebreaker again, like you're saying as an alcohol replacement, definitely a social lubricant, let's call it. How has your kind of use, affected your relationships? Did you suffer from social anxiety at parties and when you're out at public space, you find yourself taking Kana, before you're in a social setting like that?
yeah, I mean, I definitely have social anxiety for sure. Um, and I have found it to be, I don't know if it's because I work with it, but for me, when I take it, it is super strong, like really, really strong. And it, it has been really good for me to just drop in to my body, like get out of my head and just be calm and be present and have fun with people. So that's been really helpful for me. Um, I think it really is an individual experience, though. I've seen people really have a broad range from it feeling much more stimulating for them. They're much more bubbly and chatty. For me, I feel like just the stress goes away and I feel a lot more relaxed.
Beautifully put. Now, when people are wanting to take Kana, do you recommend that in like a capsule form? Are they mixing this in with their coffee and mixing it with caffeine? Have you experimented with that? What is your advice to somebody wanting to dip their toes in?
Yeah, I like I said, there's so many different use cases for it. Um, but you mentioned one of my favorites, which is mixing with coffee. When I do events, like live events, I'm sampling out coffee for people. I'll do just a little bit of cold brew and some kind of like oat milk or something, and a dose of the Bliss or the Lift extract that we make on our website with just a little bit of caffeine. Really activates it, and it feels like you microdosed MDMA when you
Oh,
take it
wow.
that way. and and like I said, after a couple hours, you're just back to normal. So it's sustainable. I mean, you can take it every day like that. In that it would be like a 50 milligram dose, 25 to 50 milligram dose. You could take that every day. Um, the On our website we have different form factors so that people have options. The powders that we sell are just pure extract powders, and that's the most versatile form because you can take it however you want. Like you can take that powder, put it in your drink or your coffee. You can just take a little bit, put it in your tongue. Some people like to take a little bump with it, and like I said, that's the strongest way. But for people that don't want to mess around with the powders and that little spoon to measure it out, we do have chocolates. There's drops that are sublingual drops that are coming out by the end of the year that are really cool. Um, what else do we have? Chocolates, and then the dailies. If you take more than one of those will get pretty strong. But they're called Kanna dailies. They're capsules, and they're stacked with other like plants and nootropics. Um, they're formulated for different use cases. So like play is for mood, relax is for relaxation, and so on. Those are really meant to be taken like one capsule a day on a daily basis to provide ongoing support for those. But you could double up on those capsules and it would feel a lot stronger.
You mentioned Kanna, being sourced. This is a traditional South African herb with the tribes and people there. Is it all currently grown there? Are people sourcing this from United States? And I believe you've mentioned this to me, and a few other people who are jumping into the Kana space mentioned there's already a potential shortage coming with the quick rise in popularity and just, being able to sustainably grow and source this herb. What are your thoughts there, and how do we, brace for a quote industry being built around this?
Yeah, this is a plant that grows in the wild, but there's no wild harvested Kana that's
Hmm.
sold commercially.
Hmm.
It's all cultivated,
Hmm.
um, and there's a broad range of what's out there in terms of like the genetics that people are growing. So um, I have heard of people trying to grow it in the U.S., but I don't know if it has any potency to it. There's at least one grow in Namibia, which is a country that's just north of South Africa on the west coast of the continent. But I would say 99.9% is grown in South Africa.
Hmm.
Um, and what's really important is like the material that you use to you have to extract Kana. You can't really work with it in its plant form. Um, and that base material of plants that you have has to have a certain potency of these active alkaloids that are in the plant to really get something worthwhile, that whether you want to feel it or have it have efficacy for as more of like a supplement or for mental health. Like it really does have to have some potency to it. And from what I've seen is um, yeah, there's not as many growers that can get their plants that potent. And then to be able to stabilize it in an extract is even harder to do. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's definitely more. I don't know, shortage. That's like a. You'd have to give me a little more context of what you mean by shortage and whether that's a
I
bad thing
think.
or
Do you
not.
think demand? Do you think the demand as more information comes out about Kana and people looking for that next thing to build into their wellness routine? What do you foresee the impacts of that being on the current systems that are set up to extract and grow and distribute this?
Yeah. Um, right now, most of the demand that I see is from other like product companies that are
Hmm.
trying to get ahead of the demand. I don't know that the actual consumer demand is there yet.
Hmm.
Um, Most people that you talk to on the street don't know what Kana is yet. I think when they do know, there's going to be a lot of interest for it. um, both in the um, like what would you call that? Like non-alcohol social,
Right. This like
healthy
mocktail
social
movement.
lubricant.
People want to move away for the alcohol for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I within the psychedelic space, I don't know like where it's going to find its niche.
Hmm.
I think definitely as like a microdosing ally
Hmm.
for mental health, but I kind of put that in the same bucket as just when people realize the efficacy that it has for mental health. I think there's going to be a massive demand for it. Um, but that's a much lower amount of potency that you need. So I definitely think there's going to be supply to meet that demand. Um, and I mean, I think there's gonna be enough supply to meet all the demand. There's plenty of people that want to farm in South Africa, and this is a really easy plant to grow, and it's a succulent. So in terms of like the environmental impact that that farming has, like this has very low inputs, low water need. You
Oh
know,
wow.
it's yeah. So it's I mean it's a great plant to cultivate commercially. And I yeah for South Africa it would be a really good thing for a demand of this to explode and to create more jobs and wealth in the country.
What excites you most about, continuing to educate people, and what has the feedback been from not only your customers but friends and family, when you're educating about Kana and wanting to introduce it to somebody's lifestyle?
My favorite aspect of that is that the question.
Your
I
favorite
mean,
aspect, and then again, how have your friends, family reacted when you're educating them and wanting to, share this with them for the first time?
I think I really thrive like on the frontier of things.
Hmm.
So, when I first got into psychedelics, like my whole family thought I was crazy. So, and now now it's being looked at really closely
Hmm.
for the benefits that it has, um, and and so yeah, it's fun for me to be on the frontier and to just do something that not a lot of people are doing, and especially when something that I believe in and it's a
Hmm.
plant and it's connecting people to their consciousness and to the earth and to plant medicines. That's yeah. So for me, it checks all the boxes, and just that it's new, and um, I yeah, like it's like I said, the coffee and Kana thing is really fun because people aren't expecting to feel that good
Hmm.
when they take it, and so that I think that's my favorite thing to give out to people when I'm doing like a live event. They genuinely are surprised at how happy they feel.
Could you explore with me some of the more traditional ceremonial South African routines around using Kana? Have you traveled there, and what feedback do you get when you're boots on the ground within the native environment?
So I primarily work with the Khoi. So my company has benefit sharing agreements set up with
Hmm.
the Kai Karana, which is one of the clans within the larger Khoi community, which is one of the indigenous ethnicities. I think there's a lot in
Hmm.
South Africa. The reason why we're working with them right now, and our plan is definitely to do more as we grow, but we're still basically in our first year, is it's on their traditional land that these high alkaloid strains came from, that basically everyone is cultivating now. Um, my so I've only worked with this one little, one small clan in this giant community, and so I really that's really all I have exposure
Hmm.
to as far as you know. There a lot of they don't use Kana, so I just yeah, it's a little disappointing. The um, I guess the Dutch and the South African government after that really did a lot to decimate
Oh
the
wow.
traditional knowledge and culture of all these ethnicities.
Hmm.
Um, and sadly, the Khoi is probably one of the most marginalized ethnicities in South Africa at this point. From what I've read about the San, I can give you more details of how Kanna was used, but I haven't made personal contact with them yet. My plan is to go back to South Africa this year in November and to meet with some of the San. Um, but yeah, so for what's written about how they used it is, this plant, they would wild harvest it, obviously, and the plant on its own is very high in oxalic acid. So it has to be processed in some way to actually be able to consume it. So what they would do is they would ferment it, and so that would look like they would mash it up and then put it in some kind of like skin gourd and let it ferment in its own juices. And that fermentation process would, at the least, eat up the oxalic acid, but it's also possible that it changed the alkaloid composition in some way. And then with that material, they would dry it out, and then the dried material, they would use it in a range of different ways. So when they were hunting, they would take that material and braid it and then chew on it on these long hunting trips. And that would help them. These are like multiple days where you're out under the sun in Africa, like super hot. You're not eating because you're trying to get your food. So they would chew on the Kanna. It would literally be like microdosing Kanna, and the Kanna would help them stave off the hunger and dehydration and everything that they're dealing with. So that's one way. The other way is they would smoke it, and oftentimes when they would smoke it, they would combine it with another plant. We know that they definitely combine it with cannabis, and that would be more for a ceremonial purpose. And so the San and their culture is really fascinating. Like, they are a shamanic culture. They're a hunter-gatherer culture that's still intact today. And a big part of that is entering into and coming out of trance states, which are altered states of consciousness. And they're masters of this, just moving fluidly between these states of consciousness. And there's lots of different techniques for doing that. And it seems like Kanna was like an entry point to help them enter those altered states of consciousness. But ultimately, they would rely more on things like fasting and dancing to do that. And then, microdosing for hunting, ceremonially, and then they would also use it socially to just, when they were just gathering as a community, they would use Kanna to connect.
It really sounds like a superfood. This Kanna, you had my mind turning. If they were using it to stave off hunter and it, while hunting and the hunger and thirst, sounds like a great gym supplement that no one's really jumping on yet.
Actually, there is a supplement. Do you know the podcast More Plates, More Dates?
No, I'm not familiar.
Anyway, it's like a super popular podcast for like weightlifting, bodybuilding, and
Cool.
he has a product line that uses Kanna.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's out there. Just to speak to like how central Kanna was to the San culture, that the name Kanna that they have for the plant is also the same name that they have for the eland antelope, which literally was like so important. It was their source of food. It was their source of spiritual potency. It was, responsible for maintaining the ecosystem that they lived in. And so the fact that they gave the same name to this plant as they did for this animal speaks volumes to how important and central it was to their culture.
Again, as people become more educated and we see a rise of Kanna into more people's daily routines, where do you foresee the politicians and the regulators coming in? We already saw this with the kratom and kava and them trying to step in on that and the miseducation that's going on with that herb. How do you support advocacy and education, and where do you foresee the quote industry going with this?
I don't know. I mean, I think the difference between kratom and Kanna is pretty significant. Kanna's non-addictive, has a very strong safety profile. It has decades of clinical studies behind it,
Hmm.
so it's in a much better position to you know remain a supplement.
Hmm.
Um, I think honestly, kind of what do they call that? Like pessimistically, I actually think the biggest risk for Kanna would be because of how efficacious it is
Hmm.
for mental health and just the way that we behave with pharma and that link between FDA and pharma in this
Hmm.
country. That's actually where my biggest concern is.
Hmm.
Um, it's less about it being used for
Hmm.
social use,
Right.
but hopefully because it is there is already so much um, research behind it. Uh, it stays in a good position, and there are a lot of people that are trying to keep it that way.
What goes into the process of that you specifically find better for how you extract your products and what goes into them versus, what other people are doing and, mixing this herb with whatever other supplements they can do.
Well, from what I've seen in Kana right now is there needs to be education in the consumer around uh, these compounds that are inside the plant. So
Hmm.
primarily mesembrine. So if you think like cannabis, you know, you you really needed to know how much THC was in your cannabis product or whatever to know how much to dose and all of
Hmm.
that. Like we're at the point where people don't even know what THC is right now with like so they really need to know like what mesembrine is. Mesembrine is the primary
Hmm.
alkaloid inside this plant that's responsible for the felt effects when you take it. And um, some of the bigger vendors of Kanna out there, they're just selling garbage that has like no mesembrine content, and you reach out to them, they have no idea. Um, so that is the you know the biggest issue, and I think just like it's where we really stand apart, just because we're really focused on not just mesembrine, but creating these really like customized alkaloid profiles. It's a so there's if you go on our website, there's lift, bliss, and rest. So those are all pure Kanna, but the ratio of those alkaloids to each other produce different felt effects.
Hmm.
Um, so it's really just light years ahead of the guys that are just selling like the herb by the ounce or whatever, and they don't
Sure.
so yeah, that's and then it gets more nuanced after that with the way it's being cultivated, making sure that it's free of pesticides,
Hmm.
all that stuff, and then we're doing all that, and then we go beyond that in having benefit sharing agreements that are supporting indigenous communities, and I really think my company entering this space has actually done a lot to force other people to start giving back too.
As people became more educated about cannabis, they knew that the indica and sativa were really just buzzwords. At first everybody was jacking up the THC, but now as people understand the entourage effect, they're looking for that terpene profile, that different cannabinoid profile, like the CBN, CBG in the flower that's grown. How do these alkaloids in Kanna interact? And again, you mentioned the first one, but what things are working together and what is somebody should be looking for on a label.
This is a really good question because this is where Kanna is unlike any other plant or mushroom I've ever seen, in that it has at least at this point 113 different known
Mhm.
alkaloids,
Mhm.
each with distinct effects on the central nervous system, and some of them are quite profound. Um, we focus on three, and the strains have been cultivated to be really highly potent in these three, um, and that's mesembrine that we mentioned, but then there's also mesembrinone and delta 7 mesembrinone, and with just those three alkaloids, you're able to target a very broad range of neurotransmitters, and so with different ratios, you can actually produce very tangible, like different felt effects. So to just break down those three, like what they do on their own, Mesembrine, as I said, is the primary alkaloid. It's responsible for the empathogenic
Mhm.
euphoric effects that you get when you take Kanna. So you really need to make sure that there's mesembrine in it. In high enough levels, it can become quite stimulating. Mesembrine is slightly relaxing, um, slightly prosexual, like it has some aphrodisiac qualities to it, and it's like very stabilizing. Like it's a antipsychotic. I guess you'd call it. So it has that's where the PDE4 inhibition activity comes from. So it's like really good for mental health. And then you have delta 7 mesembrine, which is very relaxing. It can be sedating in high enough levels. And so using just our profiles as an example, because there's so many different ratios that you could create with this, but lift is very high in mesembrine, very low in the other two alkaloids, and so this is going to be more stimulating, more social, more conversational. You get it in a high, especially if you get it in a high enough level.
Mhm.
You don't want to be just pure mesembrine because then it's too stimulating. Like you need a little bit of the other alkaloids. Um, then you have on the other end of the spectrum you have rest. So it's like very low, relatively low levels of mesembrine, but much higher of the other two alkaloids, and so this is going to be much more relaxing. So it's great for like winding down or like high levels of stress or like I formulated it with other herbs in the dream kind of dailies product that we have to help with sleep. And then there's bliss, which falls somewhere in between in terms of the amount of mesembrine and other alkaloids. And this is just it's going to feel you don't feel tired, but you just feel like really good in your body and melty. And that's kind of like a good range of like what Kanna can make you feel too.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad to hear you've invested in the science and the education around, not only the growing of these plants, but again, these different alkaloids and really getting these formulations down. I feel a lot of the products out there are a one-trick pony, and where you've really diversified and given people the outcome-based results they're looking for.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. What's next in your formulation science? What should people continue to educate themselves about with Kana? And again, what do you recommend as somebody's first toe dip into implementing this supplement?
So what's next for Kanna Extract Company is we have drops that are coming out at
Hmm.
the end of the year. So there'll be those three profiles that we mentioned, but they'll be in like an oil base. You just put some under your tongue or put it in a drink. So I think it'll be easier for some people to work with than the powders. And they'll be available in both a like our standard potency, which is 5%
Hmm.
extract. So it's just like the baseline, still a really strong extract, but then they'll also be available in an extra strength version,
Hmm.
which will be super strong. So that's what's coming out. In terms of what people should, or what I'd recommend people, you know, try for their first time, um, bliss and coffee. Put a little bit of bliss in your cup of coffee in the morning. I think is a great place to start. And yeah, and then just reach out to us on Instagram or by email if you have questions, and we tell us a little bit more about what you're looking to do, and we're happy to help.
As a business founder, entrepreneur yourself, I think a good question to ask would be, what was the best review or feedback you've ever received, and what was somebody's worst review they gave your products, or you felt you took and was like, okay, maybe I need to,
Yeah.
was this just a hater, or was this somebody that gave some real feedback and made you change things up?
Well, I think the there's been a lot of people that have said like this is a game changer for them in a lot of ways, but especially in like socially being able to use it for social use. The most negative comment was someone that took too much. Like there's definitely a too much, and it doesn't feel good after you take too much. It's not. Luckily, it's not like lethal or toxic, but there's definitely too much where you like don't feel well for at least 40 minutes. Like if you take too much, you'll feel really nauseous. So don't take too much. Like more is not necessarily better. Like I would say the dose range is between like ideally for social use is like 50 to 100 milligrams is where I would say people stick to.
Excellent. Well, Ryan, thank you for the time. Everybody, please check out Kanna Extract Co. That's your company. And we've got some amazing Kanna guides and education on realitysandwich.com you should read before as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.